Welcome to the Maverick Mindset, the podcast that was born out of the thirst for personal growth and a curiosity to explore all the traits of a true maverick. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, join me and let's decode the inner maverick together. And this year, I wanted to start the podcast because I was always fascinated by the diverse stories of mavericks that I get to meet in my day-to-day life. So much so that I wanted to share their wisdom with you. My guest today is Stephen Page, founder and CEO of SFC Capital. A successful entrepreneur in his own right, Stephen is passionate about helping startups get off the starting blocks and build a road to success. His business has invested in 300 pre-seed and seed stage companies across many sectors. And SFC has won numerous awards from the investment industry and continues to be at the vanguard of helping shape tomorrow's winning entrepreneurs. In this episode, we cover Stephen's own journey from someone with no traditional business background to founding and selling a hugely successful software company. We look at how he decides which startups to invest in and the criteria and facets he looks for in budding entrepreneurs. If you are considering starting your own business and raising money, this is a must listen. You will gain an insight into how to position your idea to have the best chance of scoring investment.
He interviewed me in the pub, which was another interesting place to be interviewed. I remember having a half a pint with him in Gideon Park, Essex, and thinking this guy's going to be all right to work with. So I then accepted the job. When I started, I went to his office in Ilford, and he wasn't there. He was on a month's holiday.
Right.
So I thought, oops, what am I supposed to do? And he left a pile of work there, all to do with these printouts, data processing, which I didn't know what that was really.
Right.
Check these off and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I soon got the hang of it. And after he came back, this was just the turning point on this new thing called the microcomputer, which became the PC. But in 1979, it was everybody was coming out with their own version of a PC. Yeah. It's like today when they're all coming out with different chat GPTs.
So at the starting point of the computer.
At the starting point. He was probably the most influential person in my life, actually, subsequently. And he was a public school boy. So he spoke with a very, very posh accent, and I was speaking in those days with an Essex accent. Hello, mate, how you doing? And actually, why I speak reasonably well now, I think is literally I osmotically learned how to speak from him. Anyway, we then decided to import a computer from America, £3,500. So it was this big, and it took these 8-inch floppy disks. And of course, we thought, okay, let's do something with this. And the only thing that we thought about, he was an accountant, I was, let's do accounting software. So we then bought some books off the shelf that had, in C Basic, the language, the code. So we got someone to type it all in. And of course, it was terrible. Didn't work properly, but it was accounts payable, accounts receivable, general ledger. And I went out and tried to sell it, and actually found that I could sell it, despite it was terrible. Sold it to British Beef in Smithfield Market.
Right.
So I used to go to Smithfield Market. The place was absolute slaughterhouse in those days. It's changed a bit. And somehow I got this client and sold it. And cut a long story short there, it didn't go very far, that. And so, we sold a few, we didn't make much money, but now I was away from accounting. This was my first experience as an entrepreneur, because I started to see the opportunity unfold in this new industry with a mentor who was willing to put the money down for anything. So he was funding it. I didn't have any money at that time. And so we formed the company and we started to sell this stuff, but then we realized that it wasn't very good. And so we merged with another company that had come to us to sell some software. So somehow I was then starting to get quite creative and merged with this other company. We put the two companies together to sell what they had, which was pre-spreadsheets before 123, before Excel,
before Microsoft.
Before Microsoft.
Yeah,
well, that Microsoft, please don't swear in my company, but before Microsoft dominated. And so we then went through all that. We had this financial modeling, but then 123 came out, which was the precursor to Excel. And so everything overnight, we lost our market. We weren't selling that much, but we were probably selling 200, 300,000 pounds worth in the year.
Yeah.
Overnight gone. So we found ourselves without a product.
Wow. Just as quick as that?
Just literally as quick as that, because this thing called 123 came out from Lotus. Everybody moved over to it.
Yeah. This
old-fashioned way, building blocks, menu-driven, obsolete overnight.
Wow.
So we had to move fast. We thought, what the hell? So we sat down one day and decided, what sort of application can we either build or find? And someone said, well, let's go to the big computer show that's just starting. This is 1983, so it's very early days. IBM PC came out, started to dominate, so it became standardized a bit, the software on the IBM PC. And so myself and Trevor, my business partner, co-director, we went off to Atlanta in Georgia, never been there before, of course. This was a new thing, to find something. We didn't know what we were looking for, but we knew if this company was going to survive, and it was zero revenue now,
so we needed to find something.
Right on the edge. So we went out and, stroke of luck, we found this tiny little booth at the back of the show, this big show with IBM and people like that. And it was called Data Ease, and it was a database, relational database software. We didn't know what that was, but it looked nice. So we didn't know what database software was. So there and then we had a look at it, played around with it, then stayed another week to negotiate with the Americans and agreed to pay them $50,000 for exclusive rights for the UK. We didn't have 50,000, of course.
Right. Which is it's a lot of money today, Steve.
It's a lot.
An enormous amount then.
Imagine. So we took out credit cards. Massive gamble. Me and him took about 4 each. In those days, on the minute you take a credit card out, it's a 7,500 limit in those days. Bang, 3 times 7.5, 3 times 7.5. That was 15, 22, about 45,000. So I think it was $50,000, right? So it wasn't 50,000 pounds, so it's not quite as bad. But then we paid that, and we got these exclusive rights to this thing that we didn't really know what it was, but it looked good. So we took it on, and then we started to tried to understand what it was, started to look at it in detail, and sort of put it out on the market. Got the team. We had 8 people, 9 people, sort of got them involved. Well, we got them involved, said, this is what we're going to sell. We went and got an investor then. So we got someone who put 150 in. We knew this guy. We knew this guy had made money on a hardware company.
Right.
So
kind of knew his way around.
We knew, exactly. So we knew we could persuade him if we had something. So he put 150 in for 15%, 20% of the company. And that meant we could survive while we were getting this software actually stable, because it was full of bugs, as all software is full of bugs when it comes out. So ultimately, it took 9 months to debug it. January of 84, we launched this software onto the market after this, being very worried that it was never going to be any good. And it suddenly took off.
Wow.
And because
Gamble.
It was a massive gamble, but we knew it was good software. And slowly and surely it took off. So it went from 200, we sold 250 in the first year, 750 in the second, 2 million in the third, 10 million in the fourth, really doing really well.
So all those high growth problems, probably challenges.
Yeah, massive problems and badly managed. And during this time, we had fights in the management because there were 5 directors. And of course, everyone who was involved at the beginning became a director. Yeah. So I remember the way we got around that was to hire a consulting firm and say, whatever this consulting firm comes up with to sort out this management problem, we listen to, we go with. And they all agreed. So we got that agreed before the results of the... I had a feeling what the results would be, but it doesn't matter. We had these 5 directors, and the Henley Business Centre it was, which is still going, and they recommended fire 3 of the 5.
Yeah.
Stephen, you become CEO, and Trevor, the other guy, becomes sales director.
Right. Okay.
So 3 had to go as directors and partners, and they all agreed beforehand. So they were caught anyway. And so we managed to get this much leaner structure to the business because it was too fat and it was at the top anyway.
Yeah.
And when you've got 5 people fighting and arguing, it's disaster.
Yeah.
You have to have a leader, CEO. You have to understand what the roles are of everybody.
Yeah. How did you get involved in kind of raising money and funds and looking at startups, and how did all that SFC come about?
We did have a company that I sold to an Indian company, which is another story, but we haven't got time for the 9/11 story, when we built software for the coroner's office in New York to manage dead bodies. Wow. Because they weren't dead bodies, they were body parts. They called us, very briefly, they called us in on the day after 9/11 to the coroner's office medical examiner in New York and said they were using our software data ease still, but they said we now need to get this application changed, because whereas it used to be a whole body that we found, mainly, now there were bits and pieces. Right. Because of 9/11.
Yeah, that's shocking.
So it was terrible. So we put a team in that stayed there for 7 years rebuilding this software to cater for finding body parts. One of our guys got the MBE for his services to British people going over and getting, because our team eventually was even tagging up these things and marking them and so on. Yeah. That piece of software, which was changed into an emergency management software, I did sell to an Indian company in 2009. Right. So what happens is serendipity. If you're on the lookout, and this is a big lesson, if you're on the lookout for opportunities, serendipity will occur because they're all around you. Yeah, opportunities.
Sure.
And so then the next opportunity is moving into investment.
And I guess, someone once said to me, Stephen, that one of the key things investors look for, if they're seasoned investors, are teachability. So the ability for that team you've identified their skills from your DISC system, but you also want them to be open to you giving them constructive advice. I wouldn't say criticism, it's really feedback that says, have you thought about this? And using your experience and what you have around you. And I guess that's an important thing to get them to learn and grow.
Well, we look, one of the word I use for the best founders is humility.
Right.
Not arrogance. Yeah. Right. So are they humble? Are they willing to listen and learn? The best entrepreneurs, the best founders are those that surround themselves with good people. Yeah. And they pick from these people the good advice, the good support. I know from my career, I said earlier about this guy who was the best mentor because he was such a fantastic guy for me. And he taught me so much. And particularly the early, and I'm still learning all the time, of course. You have to listen to people and learn from people. And founders who don't do that will fail.
Sure.
They need to surround themselves. So again, you watch for the founders who, they got their board meeting, all right, there's 3 or 4 on the board. And who are these other people? They're people who are here to help. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if they're on the board or not. And the founders who listen to these people and everyone and distills the best bits, they're much more chance of success.
Yeah, interesting.
Humility is our number one trait that we look for.
Yeah, interesting. And how do the world we are living in is completely dynamic, the business world, and mine the normal world, whatever that is. But what do you think are some of the challenges that, I guess, say, new businesses, so anybody out there wanting to do a startup, wanting to set out on their own, obviously you've kind of explained the way you kind of measure things and make decisions, but what are some of the, let's say, challenges, opportunities that are bubbling? Is that, I mean, we hear a lot about AI now, even in our world of licensing. So there's some obviously hot areas, but are there any other dynamics in the market?
Well, AI touches everything, first of all. So AI, large language models, is basically what it is with ChatGPT, which is one of many like that. ChatGPT is the one who's got the visibility. There's lots more, as we know, and there's also open source. So people can take large language model and build something on it.
Sure.
It is in everything now, and it needs to be. Anyone who's doing a tech startup, maybe not a food or a fashion, a tech startup has to have AI included somehow. And they all do. So, and if they don't have it, they won't get funding, they won't get, it's that crucial. Green stuff is really big still. Lots of green, climate, environmental, recyclable, all sorts of stuff there. We've done about 50 green companies. And not easy, but they are flavour of the month still. There's a lot of funding for those types of companies. There's a lot of funding for AI. There's a lot of funding for green. There is not a lot of funding for most other things at the moment. For the last year and probably for the next year or two. Funding is the biggest, and cash management is the biggest challenge for all companies at the startup and scale-up stage.
At any stage.
At any stage, pretty much.
Remember you saying on your list of things that in order to manage those businesses, particularly the ones you're investing in, is you don't run out of cash as a number. So it wasn't get new offices, get the right people. It was all of that. But the most fundamental is you don't want to be going and sitting in board meetings where the number one item is how do we raise more money?
Always. Unfortunately, it's the biggest challenge. It actually is how to stretch the funding. So if they get an SEIS round, a couple of hundred, how can they stretch that in order to get some level of traction to appeal to the next funding round? Whenever all startups and ultimately scale up and should have a funding strategy. Don't just play, well, let's go and raise some money, then don't worry about it again. Because it will not happen. Cash, the old saying, cash is king, is correct. Think of cash like gold that you're not going to let out your hand. Don't throw it around. It's too easy to spend money. And it's not easy to find it. Right? The best thing of all is if you can start making revenue before you run out and you can start to get some income from customers, that's the best funding of all, of course. But the biggest challenge is unquestionably how to manage the cash. Don't pay too high salaries. Get people on salaries, low salaries, give them a lot of options.
So they enjoy
stock options.
You're on the journey of success.
Totally. That's where back to the team. So back to my two that I mentioned, Joseph and Angelica, the minute they came on board, I gave them 10% each of the company. You have to get people in the whole scheme of things, believing in what's going on and have a reason to do it. Motivation.
And you mentioned about one of your very early mentors was your initial business partner. And I think we can all look back as entrepreneurs and say people that have had big impacts on life, me especially, people that have helped me. Is there anybody on a bigger level you look at in the world and you admire, any one person?
I used to, I would say. These days I get disillusioned with people, I'm afraid. Some of these big, so-called big people, Elon Musk and co. I get a bit disillusioned with them because they're a different world. Whereas I used to, in the early days, Richard Branson was a big hero of mine. Maybe even Alan Sugar, actually, who we dealt with, actually. Wasn't a nice guy, but he was very successful. And so I had those sorts of people. More lately, it's a struggle for me, to be honest, because I don't see the right level of humility again.
But also, I guess, in some worlds now, because of the way tech has exploded, let's say, the wealthiest have got, I suppose, are so out of touch for all the right and wrong reasons. I guess not necessarily their fault, but it's almost like, how can you operate in reality?
Yeah.
And I think from my point of view, it's great, just touching on that humility description. It's the people that are able to stay normal, even though they're become extraordinarily successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a pound's a pound. Yeah, it's still understanding the mechanism of value and cash.
And things can change tomorrow, as we know. I mean, don't be arrogant, because things can change tomorrow when you can't be arrogant.
That's right.
But I would always say to people, go and meet as many people as possible everywhere. Just network.
Yeah.
And you'll come across maybe 1 in 100 only, but you have to do a lot of networking, but that's fine.
Yeah.
1 in 100 you will find is useful for you for the future, either advice or mentoring or working with or doing some deals with or whatever. You've got to get out there. Anyone who doesn't get out there physically, not on Zoom,
sure.
to these events that are, and we're so lucky here in London.
Yeah.
Every night there is, and every day there's pitching events and networking events and investor events and all sorts of stuff that anyone who wants to be in the startup scale-up world, or startups in particular, because it's starting, go and network all the time. Go to all these events and don't be concerned about, rushing things. Take a bit of time.
Well, that's good to know. And I guess kind of wrapping up, I mean, some of the key takeaways for me is obviously your measuring system, DISC, and I'll put that on the liner notes so people can understand exactly what it is. The humility aspect is something that really I really warm towards, because you've got to deal with people that are human and understand we're all fallible. And then that networking piece, couldn't agree more. I think if you're fortunate enough to be in London, you should go and meet as many people. There's a great talk that Steve Jobs did. It wasn't Harvard, it was one of the Stanford, I think. They gave a big address, and he talked about the 3 points. Everything's joined by 3 points. So things that happen at a certain stage of your life, you don't realise the significance till later, because it joined up that dot, went that person, and that happened, and all of a sudden. So you never really take it for granted that wherever you are.
One thing I would add is, be sure, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, are you an entrepreneur? So many people think they're entrepreneurs. Why? You are either, there's a reason why someone's an entrepreneur, in my book. And it could be traced back quite a long way in one's life. And I personally, when I didn't think I was an entrepreneur. Maybe I wasn't, but I think I probably was, because I've had a few businesses or achieved some things. But the only reason I got into it was because I was driven by something. What was it that drove me? Was coming from a working class family with very little money, but wonderful people. In those early days when I started the company, I needed a couple of thousand. And my parents had 2,000 quid. That's all they had. They gave it to me.
Wow.
The minute that happened, there's no way I was going to fail.
Yeah.
I was totally driven by a number of things. One, my background as a working class lad from Essex, meeting also this mentor who was he was public school boy, blah, 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 thinking there is a lot to life rather than being working class lad in Essex who might have ended up as, all right, an accountant, I've done well. But most importantly, I was so motivated to be successful from my parents doing this to me. And that triggered something in me. And then add all these other triggers, like the guy who gave me the suit, my mentor friend, the public school boy, showing me, he took me on a yacht in Cannes. And, he took me on holiday with him every year. Which was fantastic. For about 10 years, I was going around the world on a yacht. I mean, you start to understand why people get motivated. And so an entrepreneur, I think, is not made. Well, it comes from very early on. What is your life like? And if you look at a lot of the successful entrepreneurs, they had something going on in their first 20 years that drove them to want to prove to themselves that they are actually worthwhile, and motivates them to be successful.
Really interesting point, actually, because you crystallise something there for me. It's that inner drive.
Totally.
It's almost like any entrepreneur, you could take the money away from them, which is one measure of success. Or you could say you can have the money or you can have the experience and drive. Yeah. Well, you have the money, I'll keep the experience and drive, because you know you can go and do it again.
Yes, absolutely.
And it is that ability to find that moment in yourself at those times where you can find the answers for the drive and the reasons to do something.
And when we do our scoring system, we're trying to see, if I could, I would want, it's impossible, but if I could, I would like to look at the first 20 years of these people. What did you do in the first 20 years? Tell me about your life. Tell me about what happened with your family. Tell me about any breakups or problems you had, or any illnesses, or anything that made you reevaluate your life and turn you into someone who is so determined to get through all this pain that goes with being an entrepreneur, which Rick, is very painful. And it is not for the faint-hearted to be a founder.
No. So it's a very lonely road, even when you've got a great support network. There are moments when you're many moments when you're staring down the abyss, questioning yourself. Yeah. It's an emotional game, isn't it?
It is an emotional game, full of fear. Yeah. And I even, up till recently, probably, you get this fear. Oh my God, is something going to happen to take the floor away from the company, or something's going to happen around the corner? Is a big black swan going to come swooping in and destroy what I've made? You never stop feeling that way, I don't think, because of how you created something.
That's what keeps you sharp.
And that's what keeps you sharp and hungry, and you never give up. And that's the determination that we're looking for in a founder. And so, just to finish, they should evaluate whether they are actually an entrepreneur or not. Yeah. Are they really that bothered? Are they really that interested in going through all this pain and being successful? And
with no guarantees.
With no guarantees, don't give up. Keep going until the last moment and then start again.
Brilliant. Couple of quick fire questions for you. What's the worst business advice you've ever been given?
Oh, I've been, of course, you're given a lot of bad advice over the years. You really are. It's normally to do with, taking on someone who's not the right person, having the wrong chairman. I had the wrong chairman, who was bad advice all the time. I appointed someone, actually, when I merged with the Americans. I went to live in America. I appointed someone over here, and they kept saying, appoint this guy as the CEO. He used to run Apple UK. And so I did. And he destroyed the company, that English part of the company. Sure. So you've got to be very careful about business advice from anybody. You need it, but you have to distill it and apply it to what you are doing.
Yeah, interesting.
So, that's what I would say. I think there's many different bad advices. A lot of startups, by the way, are surrounded by fake advisors. I'm saying earlier about listen to all these people. But again, distill it. So many companies come along and they say, I've got Joe, who's my advisor. I've given him 5%, and he's telling me the following, that we should raise VC money at a 10 million valuation. You've only been going 3 months. You will not raise that money.
Sure.
Get rid of this terrible advisor who shouldn't have any equity yet.
Yeah.
Give him equity later. So that be careful, if any startups are listening to this, just be very careful who you do take on as advisors.
Yeah. And then finally, if you had to buy a book for a friend, family, business colleague, whatever, which book would it be?
There's so many there. The old books were very good.
Yeah.
Crossing the Chasm, I always think, is a very good one. And that's because when a company, don't be fooled by immediate revenues. A lot of companies get immediate revenues or early revenues from friends, family, initial adopters, early adopters who think, oh, that's an interesting thing, blah, blah, blah. But then they come across this wall, and it's the chasm.
Right.
How do you get across that chasm? Because if you get across the chasm, momentum kicks in.
Yeah.
You know this, Rick.
Sure.
It's very painful to get that first bit and then to climb across the chasm, which is you can drop into that chasm and fail.
Be gone forever.
Be gone forever. If you get across it, there is this thing called momentum. And I've seen it 3 or 4 times in my experience. We've got it now with SFC. We've got such a inflow of company and investors, and it's all happening. I don't need to do anything anymore.
Sure. The momentum
will kick in.
Yeah.
So that's why Crossing the Chasm was a particularly important book. And that's 20 years ago or something, isn't it?
Good to know. Stephen, been a real pleasure. You are
Likewise.
a true maverick. I've always wondered your dress sense is impeccable. So I was going to ask. I'll ask you later where you got the jacket from, but that's not for now.
Paul Smith,
is it?
Yeah.
Well done.
Smith, yeah.
I think for me, that there's been, as always, there's a lot of learning for me, just to kind of replay in my own mind what I'm doing on a daily basis, even though I've got, I guess a more substantial business as a startup. But for anyone listening, in terms of wanting to understand the rudiments of starting out, I think you've given some really great advice.
I hope so. I mean, that's the key. If someone just can listen to this and get one thing out of it, whatever that is, then it's been worthwhile, isn't it? It's a tough world. It's a tough game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And good luck to any startup, any entrepreneur that makes it. You've got to say, well done, even if you don't like them.
Yeah.
You really have. Well done.
And keep the humility.
And keep the humility, absolutely.
Thanks, Steve.
Indeed.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.